Last episode, I told you I had some conversations to have, people to sit with, questions to ask. And today I'm going to tell you about what one of those looked like. And I want to start with the moment just before, the moment between deciding to do the thing and actually doing it, because I've been thinking about that moment for the better part of a week. And I think it's worth slowing down on. It's a small moment. The laptop is open, the call link is up. There are a few minutes until the time I said I'd be ready, and I'm sitting there with this very particular feeling, somewhere between excitement and dread, that I don't think I can name better than this. I don't actually know if I have anything to offer this person. And I'm not saying that in a fake, humble way, but it's in a real way. The person on the other end has said yes, generously. He'd cleared an hour for me. He'd shown up to a Zoom link with full attention and zero hedging, the way people who've known you for a long time will show up when you ask them for something. And I was about to find out whether the questions I'd been carrying around for months were actually going to do anything when they hit another human being. So that's what was in the room when I clicked the link. Not preparation, not confidence. I mean, I did all those things. I did the preparation. But I was just a person on the other end who deserved better than I was sure I could give him, and a question I'd been asking myself privately about to be asked out loud for the first time.
I'm Sam Kirk, and this is The Last Lift Operator.
If you're new here, quick orientation. There used to be a job called lift operator. Real, skilled, respected work. The white glove guy who made the elevator go up and down and stop at the right floor, telling you what was on that floor. And then one day, the doors started opening by themselves. And suddenly, the lift operator was no longer a profession. And of all the jobs that existed in 1950, economists point to this role as the only one that automation truly eliminated. Not restructured, not reinvented, eliminated. I think about those people a lot because I'm a marketing and communications professional and I'm in my early 50s. And in the last couple of years, a significant portion of what I spent my career becoming good at has been commodified by AI. So this shows me figuring out what comes next and how to do it out loud in public. This is episode 6, the first real conversation. A little context about who I was talking to. I'll call him James. It's not his real name, but that will work for the purposes of this episode. James is good at what he does. It has been for a long time. He's in a role he's grown into with people around him he respects, and the work is going well. By most external measures, he's in a great spot. But he's been carrying a question for a couple of years. And the question is some version of, do I keep doing this thing I'm doing, or do I push for what would be the next obvious move? And the thing about him is that the next obvious move isn't a small step up. It's a major change, a different kind of role, a different kind of public exposure, a different kind of risk. With the version of life he's built, with the part of himself he'd have to put back out onto the field. That's the risk. And he used a phrase early in the conversation that I keep thinking about. Don't mess with happy. Now, he doesn't mean that messing with happy always ends in disaster. He's seen the full range of it. Sometimes it works out brilliantly. Sometimes it's just inconvenient. And sometimes it's a true disaster you can't take back. His concern is that it'll definitely go badly. It's that some rocks, once you turn them over, can't be unturned. And he doesn't want to be the guy who unnecessarily flipped the rock that he could have just left alone. But there's another part of him that can't quite let the question go either. And he's been sitting in that tension for a long time. So that was the surface. That was what we were going to talk about. What I was bringing to the conversation was the start of a methodology, a set of questions I'd been developing, designed to surface what someone was actually trying to figure out underneath the version of their situation they'd gotten used to telling themselves. I've been writing those questions for quite a while, and I've been testing them against my own life, and this was the first time I was going to test them on someone else. So that's the spot I was in when I clicked the meeting link. He showed up, warm, not guarded. He was ready. And so one of my opening questions was, what's been pulling at you lately? What can't you shake? And what came back was fluent, considered, smart. The version of his situation he'd been, giving himself for a while. The visible tension between staying and going, the financial stakes, the kids, the way his role had been evolving and what that meant for the next few years. And it was a good answer. It was also, and this is the thing, it was an answer he'd had time to assemble. It had a shape to it. The shape was, here's the situation I'm in, here are the options, here's why this is complicated. So a few minutes in, I asked a question I'd been particularly interested in. Is there a part of this you've been avoiding saying out loud? Well, the first answer was kind of a deflection. It was polite, it was sincere, it was not evasive. Mostly just a reflection on getting older. So I took that in, sat with it, and then I asked it again, but slightly differently. If there was a part you've been avoiding saying out loud, what do you think that might be? And that landed. James paused, and then he said something he hadn't said before, at least to me, and maybe even to himself. The specifics aren't mine to share, but I can tell you the shape of it. It was about a capacity he believed he had and a context for it he didn't currently have. It was an admission of ambition, not the ambition of, I want a bigger title, the ambition of, I think there's a version of me I haven't gotten to be yet. And I think that was the first real moment. So here's what I learned in that small exchange. The first ask wasn't enough. The first ask got a sincere, deflective, true on the surface answer. The second ask, same questions, slightly different framing, got something underneath. And that's part of what the work is if I had to start naming it. Ask again kindly, and ask again because the surface answer wasn't the whole answer, even when the person giving it isn't necessarily trying to hide anything. It's not the whole game, but it's one of the things. Now, most of life isn't built for the second ask. Most conversations end after the first answer because the first answer was technically correct. A little later, I asked him a different kind of question. What's the cost to you of staying where you are and not deciding? He answered it, sort of. He went to brain space, he went to emotional space, and he went to personal satisfaction. So I asked it again in a different way, and he went to a different version of the same circling. I asked the third time with another angle on it, and he went to another version of the circling. He wasn't quite landing the answer. He wasn't avoiding it. At least I don't think he was avoiding it, but circling. As if the answer was real and present and he could feel its shape, but he hadn't yet allowed himself to put words on it. So I had two interpretations in real time. One was he was protecting himself. The cost was real and naming it out loud would make it harder to keep going as he is. The other was he genuinely didn't have the words yet. The cost was real, but he hadn't done the work of putting language on it. I still don't know which it was, maybe both, but I do know is that the circling itself was useful information. Sometimes the most honest thing a question can surface is the fact that someone can feel the shape of an answer and isn't yet ready to put it on the table. In those moments, I had a choice. I could push. I could ask a fourth time harder. I could try to break through by sheer pressure of asking. I didn't. And the reason I didn't relates to the bigger thing I learned in that conversation. Here's the thing that happened next, and this is the thing that the episode is actually about. James mentioned something his wife had said to him a while back, not in response to anything I'd asked. We just gotten to the spot in the conversation where it belonged, and he brought it up. She told him at some point that his personality couldn't be the things he attached himself to that were outside of himself. It couldn't be the sports team he passionately loves, and not the activity their kid was into this season, and not the role he held at work. Those things are great, but they were not enough to hold a person. I want you to sit with that for a moment because of what it means. It means that the question I had been preparing to ask him, the question I'd been carrying in my head for months, the question I thought I was bringing into the room with him, had already been asked at home. His wife had already asked it, in her own way, in her own words, at their kitchen table. He had already heard it. Now, I didn't bring the question into the room. I was coming into the room where the question had been sitting for a long time. And, that kind of changed something for me in real time, mid-conversation, because if it had already been said at home, then the work I'd been planning to do, the question I'd been planning to ask, wasn't actually mine to introduce. It was already there. What was being asked of me wasn't to ask the question. Instead, it was, I'm still figuring out how to name what was being asked of me. The closest I can get to right now is be honest enough about my own version of it that he had room to be honest about his. So there's a thing that happened in the conversation that I wanted to describe carefully because it's the thing I'm still thinking about a week later. We were maybe 2/3 of the way through. The structured questions had taken us where they were going to take us. The deflection has been mostly worked through. The cost question had been asked from 3 angles. His wife's words had landed in the room, and I had a choice. Now, I could stay in the role I'd cast for myself going into the conversation. Facilitator, person asking the questions, person whose job it is to hold a clean line between his stuff and my stuff. And that was the model I'd had in my head, structured discernment. Me asking, him answering, like therapy, like coaching, with that careful asymmetry between the two roles. Or I could tell the truth about where I was at, which is that I was sitting on my side of the screen with a version of the exact thing he was wrestling with. Not the same shape, but the same architecture underneath. So I told him roughly, I've been putting all this worth for myself in whether or not I do these things. And when it doesn't turn out, or it's not the thing I thought it was, it just decimates me. Now, that was me. That's the thing I've been wrestling with my whole adult life and only really starting to put words to in the last year. The thing I named, in earlier episodes here, that I had welded my sense of self so tightly to what I produced that when the producing changed, I lost the thread back to who I was. And then I said something like, and I wouldn't normally do this in a session like this, but you and I are friends, and I think you need to know I'm sitting in the same room as you on this. And James answered with, and I'm paraphrasing, yeah, like what happens when everything we've been chasing has been caught? And I think that insight hit him as hard as it hit me. Here we are, two people on a Zoom call with the same question being asked of them from different sides of the room. Mine, from being out of work, from being 51 and rebuilding, from a career disrupted by forces I didn't choose and by patterns of my own that most certainly don't help, trying to figure out what's next. And then his, from being at the top of his field, almost empty nest, achieved a lot, and trying to figure out what's next. I didn't deliver an insight to him. I just admitted I was in it too, and the conversation got real once I did. A little later in the conversation, James brought up someone close to his family who had passed away several years ago. The person's passing had been on his mind because we were coming up on an anniversary of it. What was interesting to me was that this significant event and his thinking about it didn't come up at the start of our conversation, and it didn't come up in the part of the conversation that I would have thought it would. Instead, it came up after we'd both told some truth, after the room had changed. What was on his mind was thinking about what his late friend had planned to do, but hadn't gotten to do. There had been plans. There had been a life that was supposed to come after a certain chapter ended, and it didn't get to happen for him. The runway ran out before the living the rest of it started. And that was the real thing James was carrying, and he brought it into a conversation about what was next. And then I noticed something that has sat with me since. The question I thought I was bringing into the room with James, it had been asked of him before by his wife, by the absence of someone he loved, by his own quiet circling around it for years. I hadn't been the one bringing the question into the room. I hadn't even been the second. I had been somewhere down the line of people in his life who had already, in their own way, by their words or by their absence, asked him this. And that's where the discovery actually started to take shape for me. Not in real time during the call, later, the days after. Near the end of the session, we were talking about action, about what spurs people to do the things they say they want to do, about deadlines and self-imposed structure and the difference between I should do this and I'm actually going to do this. And somewhere in there, I said something I wasn't expecting to say. I just want to be the person who wants to take the walk. Now, that came up because we'd been talking about people we knew who actually like going for walks, who choose to, who say, I'm going to walk today and do it without it being part of a productivity loop, without a fitness app, counting steps, without a podcast queued up to make it productive, just going for a walk because that's what they want to do. And neither of us is that person. We both want to be, and we're not even the same kind of not that person. James is wildly driven by external pressure. When the deadline shows up, he meets it. He's a deadline guy. He's an achiever. Always has been. Me? I'm embarrassingly not driven by that. Even when the deadline shows up, even when I can see it clearly, somehow it doesn't always move me. I wish it did. It's my Achilles heel. It's the thing I really admire about James. But the same end result in both of us. When nobody's making us walk, we don't walk. And that's the bit I keep coming back to. It's not that we can't. It's that we're not. There's something underneath that small confession that's bigger than walking. Obviously. When so much of your life has been built on having to do things in order to be okay, you forget how to do anything for the simple reason that you want to. And that's just a small version of the question, Who are you when no one needs you to be anywhere? The answer for both of us on that call was something like, I don't fully know, but I'd like to find out. And that was probably the truest moment in the whole hour. I came out of that conversation knowing something I hadn't gone in knowing. I had thought that the work I was building was about asking the right questions, like if I had the right framework, the right sequence, the right pressure points, I could surface what someone needed to figure out about their own life. And that isn't quite right, or it's right, but it's only a small part of what's actually going on. Right now, all the professional therapists in the world are rolling their eyes at me, I'm sure. Not as easy as it looks, huh, Sam? Yeah, you're right, counselor friends. So, the bigger thing I learned is this. The question I had been carrying around in my head for months, who are you, separate from what you do, was not a question I was bringing to him. It had already been in his life for years. His wife had been asking him a version of it. The absence of someone he loved was asking him another version of it. He'd been circling around it on his own. He had been answering it incompletely, partially, fluently, the way most of us answer the questions people ask us when we're not quite ready to give the real answer. What our conversation did wasn't introduce the question. Instead, I suspect our conversation made it possible for him to believe he could be ready to really consider it. So then he was open to considering it. And possibly the other thing that made it possible was that I stopped pretending I was on the other side of the question. I admitted I was in it too. Now, I don't think I would do it exactly the same way with everyone I do these sessions with, but I think a certain level of openness on my part is necessary to inspire openness in other people. And that's what I came out of it knowing. And I also came out of it knowing something else, which is what I want to leave with you. If the question was already in James's life, in a man with a great job, an amazing family, a clear sense of what he's good at, then the question almost certainly is in your life too, in voices you stopped really hearing because you've been busy being good at your job, from a partner who has been gently naming what they see in language you've heard so many times it doesn't register anymore, from a parent who lived through some version of this and tried to tell you, from someone who's gone now, whose absence is asking you what you're waiting for. Everyone I know who is paying attention is being asked some version of this. Most of us are answering it incompletely. Most of us are buying ourselves time by being good at our jobs. And I think we're going to run out of time. Now, not in a doom way, but in a real way. The thing AI is doing to some of us more than others is taking away one of the main strategies we've been running for not having to answer this question. We were told for most of our adult lives to find work we loved, to do what we were passionate about, to find our purpose in the thing we did for a living, to do what we love and we'll never work a day in our lives. And I know that advice was given with the best of intentions. But I think it tied a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us, to an external source of value, our jobs, our roles, our craft, the thing other people paid us for or admired us for. And it didn't have to be a job. People do this with parenting, with sports teams, with activism, with ministry, with the gym, with social media, with anything where the value lives outside us and we get to feel like ourselves while we're doing it. And when that thing disappears, or even just changes shape enough that we don't recognize it anymore, who are we? And that's the question. That's the one. And it's getting louder for a lot of people. AI is making it louder faster for some of us specifically, but it's not just an AI problem, it's an externalization problem. And I don't think the culture is ready. I don't think the structures we have are ready. I don't think most of us are ready. And I want to spend some time on that, but that's for future episodes, so stay tuned. I'm Sam Kirk, and this is The Last Lift Operator. So next time, I want to talk about something specific that's been quietly disappearing across a lot of professional fields. Not just a skill, a structure. A way that knowledge and judgment used to get passed down from one generation to the next, and what that structure used to do for people, younger and older, that we haven't been able to replace with anything yet, not that I can see. So what that meant for who you got to be in your work, what's happening now that it's gone, and what it might be costing us that we haven't fully named, that's what I want to get into. Before we go, I want to hear from you. What in this episode really hit home, or what really impacted you in past episodes, and what concerns you most for yourself as our world is rapidly changing? So you can go to samuelkirk.com and you can find ways to connect with me there. That's my full name, all one word, SAMUELKIRK.com. The link's in the show notes. And I read everything that comes in, and I mean it when I say I'd love to hear from you. And I'm on LinkedIn too. And my thanks to so many who have been so supportive of me putting together this podcast and this new venture. And I especially want to say thanks to James, who sat on the other side of that call. You said yes when I wasn't sure I had anything to offer you. So thanks for listening or watching, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.